was eerie. I still remember like the empty roads of Somerville, empty tunnel, empty highways. This was the only window to get that data. It was not an opportunity you wanted to waste.
In March 2020, Massachusetts went into lockdown to limit the spread of COVID-19. Air quality researchers from Tufts University jumped at the chance to see what pollution levels would be like with substantially fewer cars on the road.
I thought my instrument was not working right. I had to go back to the lab and pull out one that was freshly calibrated to make sure, make myself believe that yes, what I was reading outdoors was as clean as my indoor lab air.
Scientists and public health researchers have long warned against the dangers of traffic pollution, but now they're learning that a mostly ignored element of such pollution may be even more harmful to human health. This newly studied risk comes from ultrafine particles.
Ultrafine particles are the tiniest of the tiniest of the tiniest particles that are in the air. The larger particles are more like dust, the things you might see in a beam of light from a window. And the tiniest particles are invisible.
They're so small it would take a lineup of 1,000 of them to match the width of a single human hair. While each ultrafine particle is minuscule, there are as many as 250 million of them in a lungful of air. Fossil fuel burning engines like cars and trucks are a major source of ultrafine particles.
You get these really rich, concentrated zones of ultrafines right next to the highways or at busy intersections. And these concentrations can be as much as 10 times higher than just the concentration just a few hundred meters away.
And a lot of other pollutants, you can measure them at one central site and you can get an idea of what the levels are across a large regional area. Because ultrafines change so rapidly in space and time, that's not going to be possible. So I anticipate that developing federal regulations for ultrafines is going to require a different approach than for other pollutants to date.
So this is a portable version of the particle counter that we have inside. Right now it's reflecting a background of around 10,000 particles, which is sort of the reasonable background that we read in the area. But if I was right next to a highway, I can expect something around 70,000 to 80,000 particles per centimeter cube. So that's about the volume of a sugar cube. These are very small particles, so it's a huge number of particles in a small volume.
Somerville, Massachusetts lies just north of the city of Boston. With more than 80,000 residents, it's one of the most densely populated cities in New England. Mostly, though, people don't stop in this city. They simply pass through on their way to Boston. Several major highways, including I-93, take them there.
I-93 in Somerville turned out to create, unfortunately, the perfect case study, because the people who live either side of I-93 in Somerville have very high exposures, especially in the wintertime, to primary ultrafine particles.
No traffic is not a scenario that we were imagining ever. It's what in our field of research sometimes is termed as opportunistic research or a natural experiment. We were out there within 10 days of the lockdown. We went out as often as I possibly could and as long as I could sit. Honestly, it was, the biggest problem then was I was pregnant and I 6 months, 7 months pregnant, you need to use the restroom a lot. And there were no restrooms available anywhere. The goal really was to just document this change in air quality that was happening.
There are many obvious disadvantages to living next to a highway, but ultrafine particles present a uniquely insidious threat.
There are three primary areas of health outcomes: respiratory, cardiovascular, and neurological. And the respiratory health outcomes are what everyone thinks about: asthma, breathing, lung function. But that isn't actually the main health concern. The primary and most important health concerns are cardiovascular to date.
There's also mounting evidence that, because of their incredibly small size, ultrafine particles might even impact neurological health.
If you breathe them in, they can travel up the olfactory nerve at the back of your nose and go directly and deposit into your brain. So the fact that they can travel around your body that way, I think is particularly disconcerting.
The precise health effects of ultrafine particles are still poorly understood. In part, that's because it's only those who live or work near major roads who are most at risk.
Lower income, minority, and immigrant populations tend to be disproportionately located near highways and major traffic sources. A lot of that has to do with property values, the price of land, where it's possible to build affordable housing, and things like that.
Somerville always had a reputation of, being kind of rough. I heard terms like Scummerville and Slummerville growing up.
Those living close to I-93 have been fighting for their neighborhood since before the highway was built in the 1970s. Despite their protests, construction of the highway was completed in 1973.
I grew up in a neighborhood that's known as the Nunnery Grounds in East Somerville, and many of the 3-family homes that were part of our neighborhood were to be demolished to make room for I-93. And our streets, which connected to Mystic Avenue, would now be cut off by a wall of highway and pollution. My mother Barbara and my Aunt Dolores, as well as all of our cousins and my siblings, they were all at the forefront with my grandmother in this fight. What they would tell you is that they have no regrets of the time that they put into it, but they have regrets that we didn't succeed in getting some of the mitigation that would have made a difference.
There's certainly no justice in living that close to a highway and having no protection. We're talking about the most economically challenged population in Somerville. It's high time now to kind of right that wrong and at least do what you can to make our area safer.
Getting that justice will be a long process. While current law regulates larger classes of particle pollution, ultrafine particle pollution remains unregulated.
For me, there will not be a resolution of the ultrafine problem in the United States or elsewhere until there are federal regulations. I would say that ultrafine particle health research is in a transition zone. There is growing evidence. I find a lot of it very convincing, but there maybe are not the definitive, hardcore, large studies that drive national policy. And that's going to be an expensive and very large and difficult thing to do. And that is a big problem. When we don't have the research at the level that will drive federal regulations, we're at a bit of an impasse.
Until such research does lead to regulation, researchers and activists are looking for other ways to reduce the health effects of ultrafine particle pollution.
Sound barriers do what the name sort of says. They block sound, but they also do block air pollution.
Originally built to block out the sights and sounds of highway traffic, sound barriers have also been found to channel air pollution up and away from nearby residential areas. But even here, most Somerville residents are left out.
Somerville just continues to go with no barriers, just taking the full brunt of the noise, the air pollution. It's a slap in the face to me and to my community.
Another approach is to focus on keeping air pollution out of the home.
The thing you focus on first is blocking ultrafine particles from getting into where people live. And that can be done with tight houses and with good air filtration.
Measures like these may help Somerville's residents, but they don't address the root of the problem.
It's a band-aid, having better filtration systems in the home. The problem still is all that traffic and all the emissions coming from the highways and roadways.
COVID-19 offered a glimpse of an alternative, what life could be like without traffic pollution.
I hate to say there are great things coming out of the pandemic, but there is no rush hour anymore. And that means there's no parking lot with cars idling outside of my house every morning.
Global air pollution plummeted during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. But as the pandemic wanes and people resume their normal lives, the pollution is returning. Mitigation strategies like sound barriers and in-home air filtration offer some relief, but they don't erase the problem. A more permanent solution will require more radical change. It will require greater reliance on public transportation and fewer fossil fuel burning vehicles on the road. To end the threat of ultrafine particle pollution once and for all, we must be ready to rethink the way we live and how we move through the world.
Do we want to go back to the ways we used to travel? Is there an alternative?